Hey gang, so this is just a quick introduction before the main introduction, just to say, don't worry, this isn't a 30-minute long tutorial. Actually getting the Supermodel network set up really doesn't take that long at all. The video is just a little bit on the longer side because I talk about some of the other things that you can do with it, like getting a 2 and 3 player network working, and how you can keep adding additional players after this. I also show a quick way you can get your controller configured using batch files, and how you can use multiple pads for multiple versions of the emulator when they're working. I also talk as well about how you can set up a live cam in Daytona 2 if you're running multiple versions of the emulator. And at the end of the video I discuss the differences in setting up a single system network of Supermodel and a multiple PC network. I'm going to divide the video up into chapters in the video description, so if there's a specific bit you're interested in, you can jump straight in with that. Anyway, enough intro chat, let's get down to business. Hello chums. So back in July 2020 I released a video demonstrating how to get Supermodel, the Sega Model 3 arcade emulator, working in a multiplayer network working on a single PC. This old version of the Supermodel network didn't work perfectly though, and could only play the games at half speed, so no matter how powerful your PC was you couldn't get them any faster than that. In March 2021 though, a new simulated netboard option was developed by one of the Supermodel forum members called GM Matthew that was now able to run the Supermodel link-up games at full speed, and also, over the course of several incremental updates, also added in a load of extra games that previously were non-working in link-up mode, like Le Mans 24 and Sega Rally 2. This new simulated netboard replaced the old network that I'd been demonstrating in my old tutorial, and with it the setup changed slightly too. The basic principle of how you got the new network working is basically unchanged from what I demonstrated before, but the information to configure it in the config ini file is slightly different now, so I thought I might as well do another video demonstrating how you set it up from scratch. I printed out some notes to refresh my own memory of how to do this, so if you hear the odd rustle of paper in the background, that's just what it is. So let's just have a quick read now to see what I've written down. Okay, here we go. They're on to you, hide the bodies. What the fuck? So that was obviously not the right note for myself. You should probably just ignore that. Okay then, so let's get a Supermodel network working. So the very first thing that you're going to want to get hold of is a copy of the emulator itself, which you can download from the Supermodel homepage from the download section here. This is one which I've just downloaded today, so it's hot off the press, as they say. You're also going to want some games to use on this, which you can find easily with Google, and I've also just got a text document in here with some information which I'm going to need to use later to actually get the game started. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is create a new folder. Now, I'm going to call this folder Master. And what I'm now going to do is pop my copy of the Supermodel emulator into that. And I've also got a copy of Daytona 2 Power Edition in zipped ROM form here, which I'm also going to stick into that folder. And that's the game that we're going to be using to get this network working. So firstly, right click on your emulator zip file and go to extract here. So before we actually configure the emulator itself, what we'll need to do is actually get the games configured properly as well. Now all you need to do is just left click on the Daytona 2 zip file, drag it over to the Supermodel.exe and then release. Because of the fact I've not used this before, I've got a little thing up here asking if I want to run it, which I will do, so run. Okay, so that's working as it should be. Now, because this is going to be the master folder, we're not going to need to change anything in the actual game itself for this one. So I'm going to close that down. And then what I'm going to do is make a copy of this. And then I'm going to rename this to Slave 1, just like Boba Fett ship. Or not anymore. Now we're just going to drag the zip file over the Supermodel.exe. And this time, when the actual emulator itself starts, what we need to do is make some changes here to configure this into Player 2. So we need to get into the game's test menu, which we do by pressing 6 on the keyboard. And then I use 7 to navigate. And what I want to go to is this bit here that says Game Assignments. So I press 6 again to get into that. And then where it says Link ID, I press 6 again and change that to Slave. So next we just navigate down one by pressing 7. And then we press 6 again to change that to car number 2. Then exit again. And this will now save that to the game's NVRAM, which basically means it's a little folder here which saves changes in the actual game itself. So both our master and slave folder are now both ready to go. So now that we've got the games configured properly to work as Player 1 and Player 2, what we actually need to do next is to configure the actual emulator itself to work in a network. So what I'm going to do now is open Master in a new window, and I'm also going to go and open Slave 1 in a new window too. Now, the information that we need to change in order to get the network working is in this config file here. So if we double click on that, and then we double click on the Supermodel INI folder. So this is the INI file for the master, which I'm going to put on the left hand screen here. So if we go to Slave 1, I'm going to do the same thing there. So double click on the config file, double click on the INI file, and then I put this one on the right hand side here so I know that this is Player 2. So I'll click on the other file there, so we've got them both open. Now the information that we're specifically interested in order to get the network working is this information here. Now what we need to do is change this 0 here where it says network to a 1, and we need to do this in both of the INI files. Basically changing it to a 1 like this tells the Supermodel emulator that it's going to be working in network mode rather than in standalone mode. The bit here where it says simulate net equals 1 is basically asking you whether you want to use the new Supermodel network, which is what we do, or the old Supermodel network, which was the one that I demonstrated in my old tutorial video. Now, Player 1 here is ready to go. What we need to do is just make some changes on Player 2 here. So what we need to do is change where it says port in there from 1970 to 1971, and then we change port out to 1970. This now basically gets the two emulators working in a ring network. So when I close this, I should get a prompt to save it, which I do. Do the same on this one here. Okay, so that is the actual emulator itself ready to go. What we need now is a way to actually launch both emulators together, which is what we're going to do with that new text document that I had earlier. Let's just close the extra folders there that we don't need, just to make things nice and easy. Right, there we go. So in order to actually launch the emulator, what we need is something called a batch file, and that's what we can turn this new text document into. Now, if you're completely unfamiliar with how to use these, basically all you need to do to make a new text document is right click on your desktop, go to new, and then click on this text document option here. There we go, easy as that. Now I'm going to delete that one because I've already got the information I need in this one here. And what I'll do is put this information into the description of my video so you can just copy and paste it into your own text document. Now, basically, this is the information to get 2 versions of the emulator started. What I need to do though is between these quotation marks is put the address to the master and the slave. So if I click in master first of all, click in the address bar here, right click, copy, go to my text document and then paste. Then if we come out of that, go into slave 1, again right click here, do that again, right, copy, come out of that, go into the text document and then paste again. So there we are, master and slave ready to go. Now I've also just got a, oops, didn't mean to close that down there. I've also just got a couple of extra bits of information in here which I'll just explain about. So Supermodel.exe, that's the actual emulator itself, this is the command to run that. Day2pe.zip is telling the emulator to open that particular zip file, so that particular game. This bit here where it says input system equals X input means that I'm going to run this with an X input device, so basically an Xbox 360 pad. This is important if you're running the games in a multiplayer like this, because if you try to use a D-input pad, you'll only be able to actually send inputs to one screen. If you're using an Xbox 360 pad, they'll all be picked up by the different versions of the emulator that are open. This last command here is just telling the Supermodel emulator what size I want the screens to open at when the game actually runs. Now, in order to actually turn this into a batch file, what we need to do is go to File, Save As, and I am going to call this Daytona 2. Then to change it to a batch file, you just put .bat on the end of that. So if we hit save, that'll do that. We can close out of that, and there we go, that's saved that as a batch file. So now, in theory, what should happen when I double click on that is that we get both versions of Supermodel emulator running and hopefully linked up. So let's give it a try. Here we go, fingers crossed. Now what I'm going to do is minimize these 2 command prompt windows that open up. Going to minimize that screen as well. Go into the taskbar, show windows side by side. Boom, there we go. Daytona USA 2 Power Edition running in a 2-player linked network. Okay, so let's close these down now. Okay, awesome, so that worked out exactly as I was hoping it would. Now, what about if we wanted to add a 3rd player in there? How would we go about doing that? Well, easy peasy. What we're going to do first of all is copy our slave folder here. So we're going to make another version of that, and I am going to call this one, have a guess, slave 2. So again, we need to just configure the actual game now. So I'm going to just drag and drop the ROM over Supermodel again here. And once that runs, ooh, let's get rid of that. I'm going to press 6 on that to get back into the test menu. 7 to game assignments. So keep that as slave, don't need to change that. But what will change this bit here is to car number 3. Exit, exit. So again, that will now save that new information to the game's envram. So we can safely close that now. Now, what I also want to do is change the config file, and the easiest way I think to do this is if I've got all 3 of these open. So again, master, open a new window, slave 1, open a new window, and slave 2 open in new window. Right, so master first, config, Supermodel INI. Let's put that over here on the left of the screen. Slave 1, config INI. We'll put that kind of in the middle of the screen here, so again we know which one of these corresponds with which version of Supermodel. And then slave 2, config INI, and we'll stick this one over in the right hand screen here. Okay, so we'll open all three of these up now. Now, something I only noticed when I was doing post-production on the video here was that I somehow ended up with an extraneous dash next to where it says Network 1 in my Slave 1 folder, which then got copied across into the Slave 2 one as well. That dash doesn't need to be there, it's just a mistake. Don't know how it got in there. Luckily it didn't cause any problems with the network setup, so just ignore it. So what we need to do now is to change our ring network to include player 3. So the way that I'm going to do that is we change player 2 now. So instead of going port out to 1970, we'll change that to 1972. Now onto slave 3, slave 2 even. What we need to do there is change port in to 1972. And that is already configured to port 1970 from the previous information that we copied and pasted across. So that should work. So we should have all three of these now working in a ring network. So we can close and save that. Close and save that. And close and save that one. Now what we'll just need to do, again I'm just going to close the excess files here just to stop things getting complicated. So we'll now change our batch file. So if we edit this, make it a little bit bigger. So I don't want highlighting all that, so I only need this bit. So copy and paste, and we'll change this to slave 2. Now, because of the fact we're going to be having 3 screens on the monitor here, what I'm going to do is actually change the resolution to the slightly smaller size of 640 by 480. So I'm going to copy and paste that into all 3 of those. So and close that, it'll give me a prompt to save it, so I'm going to do that. Now, again, fingers crossed, this should now launch 3 versions. Here we go. So again, just closing those command prompt windows down, show windows side by side, it's looking hopeful. Here we go. Okay, awesome, so that works, so that's cool. Now the next thing I'm just going to show you how to do here is a quick way to configure your Xbox pad. Well, not necessarily a quick way, but an easy way. And again, this is using a batch file. So what I'm going to do is just back out of this into one of my previously used Supermodel, here we go, folders. And it's this batch file here which I've got, which is called config inputs. So we're going to copy that, and we go back into our brand new Supermodel network folder. I'm going to paste this in here, and basically what we've got in here are the command line instructions you need to put in order to bring up the Supermodel config screen. So we'll close that back down. Now I just need to actually physically attach my pad because I haven't got one plugged in. So I've got this set up specifically to set up an Xbox 360 controller, which is an Xinput device. So if we just double click on this, this opens up two different windows here. Now the actual Supermodel window needs to be selected for this to work. But if we have a little look on this command window here, it actually tells us what keyboard button does what in terms of calibrating the controls. Just a FYI, pressing B on your keyboard here will let you calibrate the individual axis of something on your joypad or steering wheel, which is useful for getting accelerator and brake pedals configured correctly. So what we need to do is have that clicked there so that basically Supermodel will now listen to what I'm telling it to do. So in order to set the controls, we press return. So there we are, it's prompting me to see what I want to put down as the start button. So I press start on my Xbox 360 pad. It's asking me what I want to use for player 2 start. We don't need to worry about that. So I press down on the keyboard to get past that. Now what do I want to use for player 1 coin? So I press press enter on my keyboard. Then press the button that I'm going to use on my Xbox 360 pad for that. Player 2 coin we don't need to worry about, service we don't need to worry about. So basically I'm just pressing down on my keyboard to move through all these controls, which are for the different sort of fighting games and actually Virtua Striker there. So here we go, racing games. So I actually went past what I wanted there, so I press up on the keyboard to go back to what I want, which is the input to steer left on the keyboard. So here we go. Press enter, press left, steer right, enter, press right, full steering, press this as well, so just press left there, so that's basically acknowledging the x-axis on my stick, accelerator pedal, left trigger, brake pedal, right trigger, shift up and all these bits and pieces. I'm not going to worry about just for this setup. Now in order to save all this information in the emulator, I just press Q on the keyboard and that will save all that information to my Supermodel INI config file. So that's the master we've set up there. Now all you need to do to configure it for the other games is again just put your config input batch file into the slaves and just set it up exactly the same way. Now if you're setting up multiple pads for multiple players, you could alternatively just go into your player 2 and player 3 config INI files and just change the bit where it says Joy 1 to Joy 2 and Joy 3. Now as I mentioned earlier, you can only control multiple versions of the emulator using Xinput devices, so basically Microsoft pads. If you try to use a dinput device, you'll only be able to control whichever version of the emulator is in focus at the time. Now obviously this is only an issue if you're playing on a single system network. If you're playing on multiple PCs, it's not going to be a problem. If you've got a dinput device though, and you want to play multiplayer on just the one PC, there are ways around it. You can actually use third-party programs to basically emulate an Xbox controller. In the past, I've previously used a program called DS3 Tool, which basically let me use 3 PlayStation 3 DualShock 3 pads, and it made my computer think that they were Xbox 360 pads. There are also other programs out there as well. I believe you can also do this with Xpadder and also X360E. Okay, so enough talk about actually configuring pads. Let's give this setup a try with the pad working now. So if I now click on the Daytona batch file, I should have working controls. Here we go.
Waiting for the other players.
So me turning the volume down on the desktop actually made absolutely fuck all difference to how it was recording. Little note to self there. This is what you would call in the industry a little bit of ADR. Basically, all I was trying to say was, hooray, the controls are working, but it got completely drowned out by the Daytona audio. So I decided to do a quick lap in the game here just to show everything working. I was so excited about the fact that everything was working on the first time that I tried it, I completely forgot to drift properly at the end and crashed into the wall. Actually stood properly around there. Okay, there we go. So that's the controls work. So all sorted. Now, one last thing, just for this particular game, I'm just going to show you is how to change one of your players into a live cam. So again, what we need to do is get to the Daytona test menu for this. So again, just drag and drop the ROM onto that. Press a bit premature there, 6 to, oh, did it too many times. Right, 6 to get into the test menu, 6 to get into game assignment, and on link ID, if we change that to live, and then exit, that will now turn player 3 into a live camera. So let's just have a quick look at that in action. So point up.
Waiting for the other players.
Now, Supermodel does have sound balancing options that you can use in your batch files if you wanted to turn the volume down on one of the emulators and have it higher on one of the others so that you can actually hear the live commentary. I haven't put any options into my batch files for this because all I'm concentrating on in this video is how to set up a network, and I didn't want to complicate things by adding lots and lots of extra options into the batch files which could potentially confuse people that aren't familiar with what they do. So because all the emulators here are just playing at the default Supermodel sound, you can't really hear what the live commentator is saying. But what I'll do here is make one of those YouTube card thingies appear in the top right hand corner of the screen that you can click on, that will take you to a video where I had specifically balanced the audio in such a way that you could hear the live commentary very clearly. Now, as I'm talking about advanced features you can add into your batch files here, it's probably just quickly worth mentioning about ppc-frequency. This is another command that you can add to your batch files which can actually help to improve the performance in your emulator by changing the actual figure that the PPC is set at. I'm not going to go into tons of detail about it here because you can find out more about it by going into the advanced features section of the Supermodel homepage and having a read there. Awesome, so that has all worked. So that is very, very cool. Excellent. Now, one last thing just to mention is if you wanted to actually get this working across 2 PCs or 3 PCs rather than on a single PC like I was doing there, all you need to do is basically change the address out here to whatever the IP address is of the PC that you want to be next in the chain, and then you just configure your port in and your port out the exact same way that you do for player 2 and player 3, as I demonstrated earlier for the single system network. So then when you configure the INI file on your player 2 computer, you just need to change the address out back to the IP address of the first computer to then close the ring network. So awesome! I am so pleased all of that has worked. So one last thing that's just worth mentioning is about how to keep adding extra players in, and I'm sure you've probably figured it out yourself already by this point. By changing the port in and the port out in the way that I demonstrated earlier, just remembering to loop the port 1 back to player 1 for the final player, you can keep increasing the amount of players into your network up to the maximum. Both versions of Daytona USA 2 will support an impressive network of 16 players. Wow. Most of the other races like Scud Race will go up to a maximum of 8 players. Okie dokie, so that is how you set up a Supermodel network in 2022. If you've got any questions about that, feel free to hit me up in the comments section. If you like this tutorial, please make sure you like and subscribe, and I will catch you again sometime soon. Take care, bye bye.
Your place third.
Game over!
Your place first. Waiting for the other place.